Ting-a-ling-ling? Is that the ad bell?
He's ringing in the good tidings of good cheer for SCI GUYS live in London at Jamboree on the 26th. That's right by King's Cross, by the way. And it's in a couple of days, so you better hurry up.
That was a lot of information all at once, Luke, but I'm going to give you some more information. At SCI GUYS live in London on the 26th of September, which, as Luke said, is only a few days away, you can see a live podcast. You can get to cue us some A's and meet and greet us.
Hello.
And you can get your hands on our brand new never-seen-before merch.
You might even be lucky enough to be the person who comes up on stage in the quickfire quiz who fights me for the prize.
It'll be a fight of brains, not a fight of brawn. We want Luke to have some kind of advantage here. And that's not all that's going to be on stage. We're also going to have a special guest up there too.
Yes, Chanel Williams will be joining us, as will you, when you've bought your tickets at sciguys.co.uk/tickets. It's in a couple of days. It's a jamboree in King's Cross. Get your tickets now and 20% off for our patrons.
And also, don't forget, if you can't make it on such short notice, don't worry. You can also get digital tickets at the same link. That's sciguys.co.uk/tickets.
We'll see you there. And if we don't, I don't like you anymore.
He's lying. We like you all the same.
I'm not lying.
We like you more if you get tickets.
I don't like you. Sorry, I do like you. Okay, let's get on with the show.
Hello and welcome to the SCI GUYS, the show where we talk about the crazy, weird and wonderful stories from the science world. I'm Corey, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, the loo-loving Luke Cutford.
I love the loo.
This week we're talking about tummy tantrums and colonic complications. But first, we have to thank our patrons, don't we, Luke?
We do. Thank you, patrons. Lovely blokes.
And blassies.
Blokettes. And them blokes.
And people of Blonde Blinery Blender. Anyway, we want to thank all of our patrons because they make this show possible. They, in fact, chose this episode. This is a Patreon vote episode. One of the things you get to do when you join our Patreon is you can submit episodes to be voted on by other patrons, and then every month we have to do one of those episodes. It's pretty fun. You also get bonus episodes, an entirely different show called After Dark. You get some outtakes here and there as well. There's a whole lot of good stuff going on our Patreon. You should go and check it out, I think.
And you get merch discounts. Wow, we're so generous. Benevolent gods, aren't we?
Yes, we're so generous. So come and give us your money, and we'll give you a little bit of money off of the merch that you also should buy. Because we're so generous. Anyway, I've got a question for you, Luke, and for everyone who's watching or listening. If you're listening, remember, get down to the YouTube comments and answer there. The question is, do you have IBS?
Not that I'm aware.
Not that you're aware.
Yeah.
Do you think you could have, what, SIBS? Secrets?
Maybe it's brewing. He's on the way.
BIBS. Bibs. You got bibs. No, I don't have IBS and you don't have IBS, so we are talking about this from a position of privilege because our IBS person is otherwise indisposed. But let's get into the episode. Look, I've got a question for you. Mm-hmm. What is IBS?
Irritable bowel syndrome.
And what does that mean?
Is it a sort of umbrella term for a collection of things? It's basically like the phenomenology of having something going on with your gut that's causing you problems with digestion, maybe with nutrient uptake, maybe with sort of diarrhea, that kind of thing.
I mean, you're not far off. In fact, you're mostly there. I mean, we'll get into it in a sec, like all of the specifics. But yeah, broadly, IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. It is the most commonly diagnosed GI condition. Do you know what GI stands for there?
Gastroenteritis?
Gastrointestinal.
Gastrointestinal tract, yep, that thing.
Gastrointestinal, yeah.
G.I. Joe. Gastrointestinal Joe.
Yes, your gastrointestinal Joe. That's what GI stands for. So it's the most commonly diagnosed GI condition. It was initially called irritable colon syndrome, not after the punctuation, after the body part, but it was changed to irritable bowel because it's more than just the colon. It's this the bowels. Do you know what bowels are?
Yeah, the GI.
Well, no, it's not the entire GI tract.
Oh. God damn it.
Is your mouth your bowel?
I don't know, maybe. I don't know what this... Maybe some weird... My skin's an organ, apparently, Corey. I'm just stopped paying attention.
So for a better definition, it's part of the digestive system made up of the small bowel and the large bowel. Small bowel is your small intestine. Your large bowel is colon and rectum. And apparently, the small bowel is longer than the large bowel, but it gets the name because it's narrower. So small is the narrow one. which makes sense, but it's also confusing because it is just bigger, probably. Anyway, moving on. 10 to 15% of people in the US have IBS. Up to 20% of the population in the Western world at any given time may have IBS. But in Asian countries, it's between 6.5 to 10.1%. It ranges depending on how you define things and how different criteria give you different ranges, right? But what's interesting to me is that it's 20% in the West. And if you look this up, as I did, you'll see a lot of places saying 20% of the world is affected by this. 20% of the world lives in China, and China is in Asia. And in Asia, it's 10 to 6.5%. 6.5 to 10%, right?
Yeah.
So how does the majority of the world, right?
Yeah.
Well, not the majority, but how does a large portion of the world bring the average up to 20 when the highest estimate for them is about 10%? How does that work?
I feel like you get a really fun answer if you asked a conspiracy theorist.
Oh my God, don't. No. The point is that people are focusing on the Western world, right? They're saying, oh, well, because it's 20% in the US and UK, that means it's 20% everywhere. No, that's not. We have different diets from people from different places. There are many different conditions, many different factors that could result in different prevalence of IBS. So maybe stop looking at the Western world as everything, as the world. Yeah, that's a weird thing to do. But yeah, IBS, usually you'll have it for your whole life. And the NHS said that it can be very frustrating to live with and can have a big impact on your everyday life, which, yeah. Otherwise, I mean, it wouldn't be a problem.
Yes.
And crucially, Luke, there is no cure for IBS. So let's get into the GI tract. Open your mouth. No. Okay, so let's get into
Are you going to dive in?
No, thank you.
Okay.
I'd rather stay outside of your GI tract. But let's get into what the GI tract is before we get into what IBS is, right? So the GI system is the GI tract and accessory organs. So accessory organ. What do you think accessory organs for the GI tract might be?
They're the things you buy as add-ons to the original. Yeah.
Oh, like upsells, like
an iPod dock.
I'm thinking like a plug-in, like a plug-in for.
Interesting.
No, so you've got like teeth, tongue, your salivary glands, liver, gallbladder. Those are all accessory organs, apparently, for the GI system. And the GI tract is pretty straightforward. It's your mouth right the way through to the other end.
Yeah. So it's the tube that you are.
Yes, the tube that you are entirely built around.
One big tube from top to bottom.
Man, I was researching this episode the other day, and obviously I was reading about the GI tract, and I try not to think about it too often, because when I do think about it, I'm like, that's the most important part. All of the rest of this is just kind of, there to facilitate stuff going into this and coming out the other end.
Yeah, I read a really interesting thing once about. So this is a kind of a tangent, but it is sort of relevant to what you just said.
A tangent on this show? Never, Luke.
So I once got really interested in reading about fourth dimensional math. And in fourth dimensional math, they have this idea called a flatlander, right? And this is how they essentially try to explain the fourth dimension is by saying, right, imagine our 3D world was actually 2D and everyone lived on a flat world.
Oh, yes.
And one of the interesting things about flatland, i.e., like one of the interesting things about if you had some organism that existed in two dimensions, is they wouldn't be able to have a GI tract because they would just be, if you imagine like any piece of paper, if you cut a hole down the middle, it would be two pieces of paper.
Yeah.
And this is the amazing thing about, we have a hole running from the top to bottom of us, but because we have the third dimension, that doesn't cause us to fall apart.
Yeah.
But if we had the second dimension, you wouldn't be able to have a gastrointestinal tract.
Yeah. So, if you want to picture this in your head, if you picture like a cross-section of a person, right? That's what we're looking at here. You're looking at like an infinitesimally small slice of a person. And if you do that, because there's a hole running down the middle of you, you're going to have two halves, essentially, two parts. But I did see, I think Steve Mould maybe did a video on this, or I saw someone do a video on this where they showed a way that it could potentially be possible for a two-dimensional being to have a GI tract by linking things in together. So despite the fact that it's two separate pieces, it's still... it still functions like that. But ultimately, what you would have to do is kind of a more cellular thing that cells do, which is sort of phagocytosis, basically glomming and surrounding something and then absorbing it into you, rather than having just an open tube, which is, well, not entirely open, but, relatively open tube, which is what we've got.
Yeah, or you could just do what some animals do, which is have the same hole for the mouth and the butt.
Yeah, you could do that also. Yeah. It's really bloody interesting. But yeah, no, I mean, we are entirely built around our GI tract. I mean, I say entirely built around. What I mean by that is that it's sort of one of the central things, right? And it gets us energy and nutrients and all the stuff we need to sort of grow, and move and all of that. And the moving, we move to escape predation and to get food, and maybe for some other stuff as well, right? And to reproduce, right? So the main goal is essentially reproduction. To do that, you need energy, right? And if we were like plants, we could just sit and do that. We wouldn't need a GI tract or anything. But we've got to move around, find food, put it in, and we're just a tube. Your arms are just there to make food go in the tube and make it easier for you then to reproduce.
Starting to sound like an incel, Corey.
Man, I'm just saying, right? It's weird to think about.
The goal is reproduction.
It's weird to be a tube, Luke. I don't like it.
It's weird to think about. Like, if you imagine like a circular wall, right? Like a wall that's like in a circle, but it goes up, but in the middle is like empty space. That's kind of like what you are. Like you are orbiting a central gap of air.
Yeah.
Like, when you think of you and then everything's contained inside of you, but actually you're like wrapped around this empty space where your food goes through and like gets absorbed by the walls.
Your inside and outside are like very different, right? But your inside and outside aren't necessarily all that different, because your inside it does have an outside of you. Do you know what I mean? Like the food that's passing through you isn't going into you. I mean, it is going into you, but like the tube, it's open.
No, it's going into the tube and then it's being absorbed through the walls.
Yeah, absorbed through the walls of the tube.
Yeah.
So like your inside of you is some outside also, which is a really weird thing to think about. Like I don't like thinking about it like the concept that I'm basically a straw with bits added on. It's uncomfortable.
A thick straw.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that humans are the kind of like a kind of animal that starts off as an anus, essentially, right? Like,
sure.
Some
of us never stop being an anus.
It's very true, like, or not necessarily an anus, but to vastly oversimplify, essentially, like the butthole is apparently one of the first things that sort of forms.
Yeah.
And then it kind of goes from there, which kind of makes sense because it is like it's a tube you want to build things around, right? And it's so strange to think of yourself as being like one piece with like a hole in the middle. It's so strange. You don't think of yourself as a straw, you think of yourself as a solid thing. But you're not. We're all straws in the end, darling.
I like the idea that we write sort of like the first, like the Old Testament, right? In the beginning was the world, but we write it about human biology, and it's in the beginning was the butthole, and then the butthole grew eyes and a brain, but it all came from a butthole. Everyone's genesis is a butthole.
Exactly. So back to the GI tract, or the entirety of the GI tract. So let's just quickly run through what that is. It's the oral cavity, your mouth, the pharynx, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, and the anal canal. If you don't know what those things are, it's pretty easy to sort of figure it out. So, like your oral cavity, it's your mouth, right? Your pharynx is that it's the big sort of space behind your nose and your mouth that connects it to the esophagus. The esophagus is the food tube.
Yep.
That runs down to your stomach. The stomach is the big bag that holds all the food and mushes it and then passes it on to the small intestine. The small intestine just takes all of the nutrients from it. Well, not all of, obviously, but it takes nutrients. It's like give me them nutrients, give me that stuff, give me that energy. I want to absorb things. And the large intestine is like, small intestine did so much absorbing, I'm going to take out water and electrolytes. That's my job. And the anal cavity is like, bye! Exactly. As we said, accessory organs. You've got teeth, tongue, glandulars, organs like salivary glands, liver, gallbladder, pancreas. What is the GI tract for?
Turning food into energy and you.
Yeah, digestion, nutrient absorption, all that sort of stuff, which you sort of, we'll run through how this sort of works, right? We'll talk about a functioning digestive system so we can kind of understand what's going on with IBS. So, as we said, it's to digest and absorb food. So that's like nutrients, stuff you need to build yourself, energy to do thing. Like thinking, that takes energy. Moving, that takes energy. Living, that takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot. It takes so much.
Sorry, okay.
Yeah, the oral cavity, what does that do? What does your mouth do when it comes to... No?
Chomping.
Okay, good.
I don't even know what you thought I was going to say. Chomping.
Something dirty.
It does some it makes saliva, and so that kind of starts digestion, which is why you should chew your food properly. Well, one of the reasons why you should chew your food properly.
I don't do that. Chew and swallow. That's me.
It does tasting, so it goes like, no, don't want that.
Yeah.
Or yum, yum, yum. That's pretty much it, I think.
Yeah. So when you say you're right. When you say it starts digestion, that is true. It starts it's not full digestion. It's pretty limited.
Yeah. Your saliva isn't just lube.
No.
It's like... it's
got some enzymes.
It's got some enzymes, yeah.
Yeah, I think amylase is in there, which breaks down sort of starches. Maybe it isn't amylase that's in there, but amylase does break down starch. Anyway, it starts breaking down some carbohydrates and lipids, which, as we've spoken about before on the podcast, are basically just fats, right? So it starts breaking down some carbs and fats in your mouth. The saliva also is, as you said, it's lube. It's a lubricant to help that food mush pass down through your system a bit more easily. Your teeth there are hard and sometimes sharp, and what they are supposed to do, depending on what kind of creature you are, if you have teeth, but if you're a human, they're supposed to basically mush food up for you, break down things like, seed shells or other such things. If there's hard food, even like corn, right? If you just, the reason that you find corn in your feces is, in a lot of cases, actually, I think it's because the hard outer shell just sort of survives. You don't think of it as a hard outer shell, right? But that sort of outside tough bit of corn, that survives, and it can still look like corn, even if there's even if it's still being digested. But because that hard outer stuff can survive, and same with like pumpkin seeds or any kind of seed, anything sort of tough, like that sort of thing, right? You want to chew it up so that it can pass through your system more easily. Otherwise, if you've got a seed and you just swallow it whole, and that passes right through you, you're not getting any really nutrients from the seed. There's no point in actually eating it at all. So yeah, mastication, chewing, really is really important for digestion.
And it increases the surface area as well.
Yeah.
So that you're everything else can do its work faster.
Exactly, yeah. And so once you have, it's passed through the oral cavity, and yeah, sorry, I just want to make sure we've said everything. So you said tasting, which is true. Yeah, tasting is really important. That's obviously that can, I think that triggers some, how you can smell something and it can trigger your salivary glands, right? So that's an important thing there. But also tasting for things that are poisonous or that you shouldn't be eating or whatnot, right?
Rotten.
Knowing what you're putting in there. So so the four main functions would be mechanical processing, sensory analysis, and lubrication, and the other one.
Digestion.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, those would be the four main, I think. Yeah.
Also because it's just fun.
That's true.
Tastes nice.
And then so after your mouth, it goes down... Let's just say it goes down to your esophagus. Your esophagus, do you know how that works?
Oh, yes, I do actually. Well, no, a little bit. So, I think we think of this pipe going down to our stomach as like a static thing, just like a corridor that the food goes down.
Just drops down.
Yeah, but it actually it squeezes, doesn't it? It pushes it down by compressing in certain areas to sort of force the food down, which I guess is why you can eat lying down. You probably shouldn't. It's not great for your digestion, but you can.
You physically can do it, yeah.
And it's because you have
can
this
eat upside down too, yeah.
Yeah, and if you imagine you have a rubber tube and you put something in it and you have it on its side, you could just squeeze it and push it along that rubber tube.
Do you know what that's called?
Undulation.
Peristalsis, right?
Ah, yes.
Now you might have learned about this in high school biology at some point, but it's really you've got it spot on. It's really interesting, right? Basically, muscles will contract on one side, on the back end of the food, let's say, and relax on the other end. And it is just, as you're saying, it's just like taking a tube and just squeezing it.
It's so weird. The fact that's going on in my body and I don't have any knowledge of it is so freaky.
I looked into this a little bit, and there's basically, I think it's two different kinds of muscle. The kind of muscle changes as it goes down. So it changes from the kind of voluntary muscle. That's why you can voluntarily swallow stuff.
That is what that's doing.
Yeah, to the smoother muscle. So it changes from the sort of skeletal muscle, which is the sort of stuff that you can control, sort of with thoughts, to the smoother muscle that you can't really control. Right? You can't control your heart. You can't think heart stop contracting.
You can slow it down if you meditate enough, apparently.
Yeah. You can slow your heart rate down, but that's not you sort of thinking muscle don't contract. That's you controlling other processes, which in turn slow down your heart rate.
Yeah.
You don't need to do that if you want to grasp your hand, right?
Yeah.
I have to make my hand do this, I have no control over what my heart is doing. And what I was doing with my hand there was just grabbing it, open and close for anyone that's listening. But yeah, you can't control that kind of muscle, right? And so after a certain point, it just starts doing it by itself. Pretty much straight away, it starts sort of doing it by itself. So the muscle changes as it goes down to facilitate that, which is really, really cool. Do you know how much saliva? We've moved past the mouth, but do you want to know how much saliva is produced in the mouth each
I'm going to
day?
guess a couple of litres.
1 to 1.5.
Wow.
Yeah, 1 to 1.5. It's mad. 99.4% of it is water. The rest of it, 0.6, is electrolytes, buffers. It says in my notes, glycoproteins, antibodies, enzymes, and waste products. So just a lot of stuff in your saliva, but it is mostly water, which is weird, right? Because it doesn't seem like water. Like you can look at a glass of spit and know that it's not water, but it's only 0.6 of it isn't.
But that's also the trend. Like apple juice will be mostly water. Coca-Cola is mostly water. It's that like tiny little bit that we detect because of the light. It's weird. But I have interest when you say that 1.5 or 1 litre of saliva a day. Are we reusing the liquid from our saliva when we swallow it, or is like that 2 litre statistic, which is probably not true, but like you're meant to drink 2 litres of water a day, is literally 1.5 litres of that going into my saliva and 500 milliliters is for the rest of my body, or is some of the water being reused once I've swallowed it?
Unlike the many capitalist systems that are ravaging our natural resources, your body conserves its resources and uses them quite effectively. Yeah, no, you'll reuse. If you swallow something, your body. Okay, put it this way: if you swallow your saliva, your body has no way of knowing that you've just swallowed saliva. So if that goes through your digestive system, it's going to be treated the same as anything else, and so the water will just be pulled out, and the same as drinking, a glass of water, right? Yeah. It's gonna treat it basically the same. So yeah, the water will be recycled, reused. Yeah, you're not having to drink.
That's a relief. 2
liters of water a day to produce some spit, only to piss it out once. That's not how it works. That's not how it works.
For you.
Yeah. So I mean, really, ultimately, your body wants to conserve as much water as possible. The reason that you need to drink water consistently is because you use water for a number of things. Specifically, like you use it in urination to get waste out, right? You dissolve urea and some other stuff in some water, and you evacuate that. And with sweat as well, that's you sweat, and then that evaporates and that cools you down. So those are just 2 ways that water sort of leaves the body, right? And so you need to replenish that water, but your body wants to keep water in its system as much as possible. So if you look at like sort of desert animals, some of them have basically solid urine, I think it's some kind of, is it Jerboa or something? I can't remember off the top of my head. But some like desert animals like urinate very infrequently. And because their bodies are trying to conserve as much water as possible, they have like basically solid urine, right? Wow. Which is mad. Your body will recycle water as much as possible because it's better for it to do that rather than just to, I've used this, blah, like we do now. Yeah, so that's the mouth and the esophagus. Your teeth, the mechanical breakdown, as we've said. Then it heads to the stomach via the esophagus, right? The food. What do you think the stomach does?
Well, it has acid, I think. And I assume it probably, is there a certain amount of churning going on? Like it moves it around to, I guess, cover the acid, coat the food in that acid, and then start the digestion process, break it down into sort of a liquid.
Yeah, so the stomach, you're right. It mashes food up. It covers it in not just acid, but enzymes to start the digestion. And it results in this sort of pasty, mushy, liquidy sort of stuff, right? And it's really interesting how the stomach works. It churns with all these muscles on the outside of it, and that's more sort of mechanical action there, right? So it's not just your teeth that are chewing stuff up. Your stomach also churns things to kind of mush them up a bit more and get everything all mixed together. And that sort of acid and those enzymes there, they will break stuff down. They'll start denaturing proteins. Your stomach acid will kill a lot of the pathogens that you eat, right? So if there's say bacteria or whatever on the outside of some fruit that you're eating, right? It hits your stomach, and there's a decent chance that they're just gonna go because it's an acidic environment, and it's made to do that. Not made, obviously, but it is evolved to sort of do that. Yeah, so your stomach breaks food down mechanically and chemically, and also it stores it as well. So your stomach can expand by quite a lot. It's insane, actually. I was reading about it. Your stomach can expand by a ton. Like, it can hold so much food. Like, I mean, obviously some people are different than others, but like, I can eat a ton. And like, if I eat a lot and I can feel it, I'm like, how much is, like, if you really think about how much food you can cram into your body if you want to, it is insane, right? Like, platefuls of food. Like, you'd be full and you'd be uncomfortable, but your stomach can just expand to hold all of that. Insane to me. And then once it leaves the stomach, where do you think it goes?
Small intestine?
Yes, you're right. So it goes to the small intestine, and that's where 90% of food absorption happens, right? There's 3 segments, the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum.
Ah, yes.
I started reading that. I just went for it.
They sound like training centers for martial arts.
Right? They really do. Like the ileum, it just makes me think Iliad. Anyway, I might pronounce this wrong. It's chyme, I think, but it's Chyme. I'm going to assume that's chyme from some sort of Greek or something, where you use a chai, whatever. I've not done ancient Greek for some time. The chyme, that's I believe that's basically what you call the mushed up mix of food and sort of digestive fluids that leaves the stomach, right? So that hits the small intestine, and the small intestine starts to just absorb all of the nutrients that it can from that. It gets some digestive material from the pancreas and the liver, so some other things come in there. But how do you think the small intestine actually sort of absorbs foods? Like, structures that it's got there. What is interesting about how the inside of the small intestine looks?
Like, close up?
Yeah.
I would imagine it's got lots of little holes that only allow, like, as in, like, in the structure of it, that only allow things of certain size to pass through and things of other sizes pass by.
I think you're going too small for what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the surface area. No, I mean, like I get what you're saying there, like a sort of selective membrane. Yeah. Like, sure, there are sort of
the blood-brain barrier is something like that, I think.
I mean, yeah, so it does have holes insofar as all sort of membranes and sort of cells have like holes, right? In that it lets certain, like, and when we say holes, not like a hole like your mouth, like it's letting molecules pass through. Yeah. But what I find interesting about the small intestine, and pretty much anything that really wants to absorb a lot of stuff, is do you know what villi are?
Are they like little hairs?
Well, not exactly hairs. Yeah, I mean, they're kind of folds, right? I think of them more as sort of fingers. So the membrane of the small intestine, right? The stuff that, basically the barrier that stuff's being absorbed through, right? It has these things called villi, and on each villus is a bunch of microvilli. And what villi are sort of folds, like sort of projections. So think of it like on the inside of a tube, it's kind of folding, so it's kind of got finger shapes. And on each finger, there are more little fingers on the outside. And essentially what that does is just increase the surface area. Like you were saying earlier, Luke, right? If you've got more surface area, then the absorption is going to be better. Do you know how that, like, why that sort of is the case for anyone that's not really getting it?
Yeah, so like so since Corey's brought up fingers, if you imagine like a finger, right? And then the surface area of the finger, like the amount of skin on your finger, and then imagine your finger had little bumps on it. The like distance you would travel to go along the length of your finger would be longer because of those bumps, in the same way that if you walked the width of a mountain, it's less distance than if you walked up and down a mountain, right? Just because it is. So like it's sort of like that, right? And so and it is like a crazy transformation when you get like enough small, densely packed bumps on something.
Oh yeah,
it like doubles, triples many times the surface area of something.
Yeah, and more surface area is really useful in this instance, because surface area is what you want, because you need to be basically in contact with the surface to be absorbed through it, right? And so the more surface you've got, the more absorption you can have in a smaller space, let's say, right? Or the more effective your absorption would be, right? For example, if you just had a bare tube, like a hose on the inside of you, right? The only contact any of that sort of like partially digested food, the only contact that would have would just be with the inside of that tube, right? So it would just be the surface area of the inside of the tube, which, if you think about how big your small intestine is. I mean, it's got to fit inside of you, so it can't be that big, can't be that long, right? So the inside of it, it's not that much, right? But because of these villi and the microvilli, these sort of folds or projections to increase the surface area, the absorptive surface area of the small intestine is about 250 square meters, which is like roughly a tennis court.
Yes, I've heard that statistic before.
Yeah.
That is insane. It's sort of like your fingerprints as well. That's like a little bumps increase the surface area, which increases the friction, which means you can grip onto stuff better.
Yeah.
And we don't think about at our scale, we don't think about it at all.
Oh yeah.
But if you were to go up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down over every ridge of your fingerprint, you'd travel so much further than the distance of your finger.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So
It's the same as the mountain sort of analogy we're saying there. Yeah, like a straight path is always going to be shorter than a path like,
up and
down the mountain.
But then imagine up and down 50 mountains.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, and imagine each mountain, and for the inside of your small intestine, imagine each mountain had another smaller mountain on it.
Mountains
right?
all the way down.
Yeah, it's brilliant. So yeah, these villi and microvilli basically just increase how much absorption you can have there. And then once it's passed through the small intestine, it goes to the large intestine, and that's when it becomes feces. So that's the unabsorbed and undigested material. It hits the large intestine. That it's called feces, and the large intestine, it's about 6 feet long, so about as tall as I am. Yeah, right? That's mad. Like it's really weird to think about how much stuff is packed inside of you. And this is why I sound like a serial killer sometimes, because I'm like, do you not just want to cut in and have a little poke around?
Nah, I'm very happy just hearing about it. I'm like, that's cool. Don't show me.
You don't want to be shown?
No.
Oh, so you'll eat meat, but you won't want to see how the sausage gets made, Luke.
I don't eat meat.
Shut up, Luke. You shut up, man. But no, I just find it really interesting because, like, this is going to make me sound like such a serial killer, but the concept of, like, cutting into a person who is consenting and a cadaver and dead, not killed by me, died of causes entirely unrelated to me. Let's say I was a medical student, right?
Wow, you're really digging it.
I'm really digging it. I really am.
Guilty conscience.
But like cutting into someone and then like just pulling out. It's like the magic trick. It's like pulling out 6 feet of intestine out of a person. It's like pulling out, like those like handkerchiefs tied together.
I think it'd be much more impressive if you pulled out a small intestine and then spread it across the surface of a tennis court. I know you couldn't literally do it.
It's just it is the surface. It's the absorptive surface area. It's not like if you were to. I can't even imagine how you would sort of unravel it. It would end up being so incredibly thin as well, you know? But yeah, no, you're so right. That would be like, you pull it out and you're like,
yeah.
Whoa, and it becomes like, it goes from like one small handkerchief to a much larger one. Yeah. That's like that magic trick.
And that's the secret of what they do at Wimbledon when it rains. Oh my God. They sacrifice one audience member, take out their small intestine and spread it across the court to save the court from the rain.
So I thought that with the wombles, right? They started doing that with wombles. That's why they're extinct, right?
Imagine how big a womble's small intestine is. That's a football pitch. That's what they do at Wembley. I know my sports.
Good, because I don't. Yeah, it's hit your large intestine. That's 6 feet long, as I've said. It's got colon and stuff. Right, absorbs water, electrolytes. I've said this all before, right?
Is it the process of removing the water from that kind of sludge that turns the sludge into poo?
I mean,
is that what solidifies it?
Yes. So that does solidify it, but the sludge is already feces.
Yeah, but not nice feces. If you were
it's like diarrhea essentially, right?
Yeah.
But like it is still feces.
Yeah.
It's just like how wet it is at that point doesn't determine whether or not it's feces.
Sure. Yeah. I can't imagine how there is apparatus in my body that can turn a liquid into it's like dehumidifying. It's like, how is it doing that? Like it's removing so much liquid that something becomes a solid. That's mad.
Osmosis.
I understand the words that might be used to describe it, but like the fact that it does that.
Yeah, I mean,
I wouldn't know how to do that outside. If I had like all the shops, I wouldn't be like, all right, I've got to turn this liquid into a perfectly formed solid. I wouldn't know what shop to go to but buy a piece of equipment to do that. And my body's just doing it all the time. I could just eat it and then I could get it turned into a solid for me.
The crazy thing is though that your body's not even doing all that much because it's just it's basically just physics and chemistry, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's biochemistry, right? But no, it's literally just osmosis. Do you know what osmosis is? Do you remember that from high school?
Yeah, it's when it like passes over a cell barrier.
Oh my God, let's see if I can remember this off the. I know what osmosis is.
Oh, it's when it goes from an area of low density to an area. Sorry, over high density to an area of low density.
Osmosis is the movement of water from an area of high density to an area of low density through a selectively permeable
membrane. Oh god, wow, flashbacks. Yeah, I remember
God.
that exact definition too.
That's why I managed to do biology. Like, I understood it fine, but I didn't need to understand anything. I just needed to memorize all of the phrases. I did get it, thank God. No, osmosis is just basically, just be so simple. Water will move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration, right? It wants to basically reach equilibrium. So if you've got sort of like something separating some water that it can pass through, but let's say let's say you've got two things of water, right? One has got a lot of salt in, and the other's just pure water. Now, if you somehow take these two containers of water and join them together in such a way that the water can pass through the barrier separating them, but the salt can't, the water is going to move from the pure water into the salty water, right? Because it wants to sort of make an equilibrium, right? It wants to reach a point where there's not like a high concentration of water and a low concentration of water. It's like basically equal concentrations of water.
Yeah.
And the dissolved salt obviously changes the concentration of water in that sort of, container or whatever, right?
Yeah. Now, I understand that this is just physics and chemistry, but the part that I find so mind-blowing is now, to get a little bit crude for a moment here, poop is not wet. It's not very wet. Poop is often it's not. You wouldn't call it a wet substance necessarily. Not that you necessarily go around feeling poop all the time, but you'd call it a solid. Is my point. You'd call it roughly a solid, right? And while I understand that this is physics and chemistry in that it's moving across by osmosis, by definition, the fact that that's happening means that the body has to create an area of low concentration that is. If it's going to reach equilibrium, that area of low concentration on the side of your body, not on the side of the inside of the intestine, has to be the density, the sort of, it has to be almost the solid-ish, the density of a poop, right? In order for it to reach equilibrium.
No, so you wouldn't need to have a solid on the other side. It's about the concentration of water. So stuff that's dissolved in it and stuff is gonna affect that. Like solids that aren't dissolved in it, I don't think are gonna have necessarily the biggest effect, right? If something's mixed with water, that doesn't mean that water is necessarily dissolved in it. So if you put a salty sort of solution next to next to that sort of thing, the water is probably going to be just drawn out. That's probably what's going on there, rather than having a solid, right? So it's about what's sort of dissolved in the water, I believe, rather than sort of just what's sort of mixed with the water. And I know that sounds. There's a difference between something being dissolved and something being mixed, right? Something dissolving, and again, I'm pulling this from chemistry to try and get the definition in my in high school to get the definition out. So I'm pretty sure something being dissolved in something else is when essentially the molecules are fitting in between each other, right? Whereas a mixture is less type
distributed.
Yeah, a mixture isn't necessarily all of these sort of sugar molecules are you can't see the sugar in it anymore because they're neatly packed between the water molecules, right? Whereas a mixture is it's not necessarily going to be mixed as thoroughly as you're saying.
Yeah, I just think it's mind blowing because there's some chemical process going on there where the body is putting something. It's either putting something on the other side of that membrane, or that's creating some conditions on the other side of that membrane that gets so much of the liquid to cross across that barrier. That's an active process that the body is as active as the body can be considered. That's a process that it is doing, and the sort of chemistry going on there, which causes practically all the water to get sucked across that membrane, is absolutely mind blowing.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, if you think about it, what you would just need to do is have a constant supply of these sorts of salts.
Yeah,
exactly, and then it would just sort of be constantly. Less an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So the water concentration would just consistently be lower than the water concentration across the other end of the it's really interesting.
Yeah.
And it's very, very complex and kind of complicated. But it is also very simple. At its very core, it is based on quite simple concepts, but built together in really sort of increasingly complex and interesting ways. And so once your large intestine moves the feces into the rectum kind of stretches a bit and it tells your brain, hey, got some stuff in here. And then at some point it leaves the rectum through the anus and
mind-blowing fact, which I can bring to the discussion. You have 2 buttholes.
Are you talking about 2 different sphincters that you've got?
You have 2 buttholes. One that you are consciously able to control and one that you are not consciously able to control. You have another butthole. It's a bit further up. And you don't know how to do anything with it, but you do have one.
So what you're talking about is the internal anal sphincter.
Yes, the other butthole.
Yeah, which gosh. So that will involuntarily, sort of reflexively, relax and release the feces into the
ejection chamber.
Well, basically behind the external anal sphincter, which is skeletal muscle, which, as we said already, is the stuff that you can control consciously. Mm-hmm. So that's. Yeah, you're. I don't want to say you're not wrong because you don't have 2 buttholes, but you do have multiple sphincters.
We're splitting butthole hairs here, Corey. We have 2 buttholes.
Okay, fine. Right. So we talk about
it's like an air hatch, just like an airlock on a space station. Isn't it?
No, it is similar to that. Yeah, except you can control both in the airlock, and in this one you can only control one.
And it's the feeling of I need to poop when the internal one has passed some to the external one, and it's like I can now release this.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
Right.
Ding-a-ling-ling, is that the ad bell?
Goodness me, he is incessant, isn't he?
Well, he's got to be incessant, look, because SCI GUYS Live in London is a mere few days away, as we told you earlier. Have you got your tickets yet? Time is running out. This episode of SCI GUYS won't start again until you have got your tickets for SCI GUYS Live in London. And I know what you're saying. You're saying, Corey, it's a few days away. I can't make that time. Well, don't you worry. We've got digital tickets available as well at sciguys.co.uk/tickets.
What does a digital ticket do, Corey?
It's a lot like a digital ticket, Luke, but it's said somewhat differently. It allows you to watch the live recording live as it's happening, but also you can maybe watch it a little bit later too if you miss it. And that's very nice, isn't it? Because if you do that, you get to see the live podcast. You get to see the Q&A, the meet and greet. You might even get to see the exclusive merch that we have that's never been seen before. Is there anything else, Luke, that I've missed?
Well, you might be lucky enough to come up on stage and fight me in a quickfire quiz. Chanel Williams will be there joining us in the science. So if you want to see how the sausage that is SCI GUYS is made, go to sciguys.co.uk/tickets and get your ticket now with a 20% off for our lovely, lovely patrons.
I didn't realise we were a sausage.
Well, everything's a sausage if you try hard enough.
Back to the show. So should we talk about the signs and symptoms of IBS,
yes,
perhaps?
Please.
So I'll just quickly run through these. Stomach pains or cramps, which are usually worse after eating and better after doing a poo. This is all from the NHS, which is why it will. I'm going to be reading it verbatim because they use such fun language when they talk about these things. Bloating. Your tummy may feel uncomfortably full and swollen. Diarrhea. You may have watery poo and sometimes need to poo suddenly. I don't know what it is about poo, but it just sounds very. It makes me think like very David Mitchell, like Mitchell and Webb, like. Poo. It's so silly. It's such
charming.
A silly word. Yeah, it's almost charming. I don't like it. Do you know what? The one I hate the most, poo is fine, right? As a word, I'm okay with that. Poop. I hate it.
Yeah, why?
Like Americans, stop it. Poop.
You're trying to make it too cute.
Yeah, it wraps around from being, it's not cute anymore. You've tried to make it so cute. It wraps around and it's now disgusting.
Yeah.
The word poop actually disgusts me.
Oh, yeah.
I hate it.
Doesn't need to be a palindrome.
No, absolutely. The little P on the... Oh, no. Leave it open-ended, Open the end of that. Anyway, so the NHS's description of the signs and symptoms. You may have watery poo and sometimes need to poo suddenly. Constipation. You may strain when pooing and feel like you cannot empty your bowels fully. There may be days when your symptoms are better and days when they're worse. They may be triggered by food or drink. And IBS can also result in flatulence, passing mucus. Basically it says passing mucus from your bottom. Sorry.
I love how charming the NHS
say that.
It's always so disarming when you read it and you're like, oh, this is in normal language, but you're a medical institution and you're saying these.
It makes me a little bit uncomfortable, but I mean, reading it myself, because I'm like, that feels weird. Don't say my bottom. Like that. It feels like you're talking to a child. But I get it because obviously you need it to be as accessible as possible. And if you start using too much technical language, there are going to be plenty of people that don't know what that is. I mean, even if you say, I don't know what an anus is. If I'm perfectly honest with you, I'm pretty sure I know what an anus is. But also, I've been wrong about what an anus is before not because I don't know what an anus is, but because people will often think, oh, your anus is your butthole or like the tube leading up to that. But actually it's like a cavity just behind that anal sphincter or something.
It's like how you might think that, like somebody might refer to like female genitalia as the vagina, where actually the vagina is a part of the sort of genital area.
Yeah, but to continue, tiredness and a lack of energy, feeling sick or nausea, backache, issues with urination, like needing to urinate a lot, or sudden urges to urinate, or feeling like you cannot fully empty your bladder, and not always being able to control when you poo, which they say is bowel incontinence. Thank you, NHS. And there are some other things that can go along with IBS. What do you think those might be, comorbidities?
I'd imagine, although I might be wrong, that it could cause a sort of nutrient deficiency disorder, or what might look like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's lower levels of certain vitamins and whatnot in people with IBS compared to those without IBS. But yeah, I mean, there's also some other things that you might not think of immediately. I mean, I say comorbidities, but these are also like just sort of different things that can be sort of related to IBS. So mental disorders like depression, anxiety.
Wow.
Also, stressful or difficult early life events is something that's related to IBS. Yeah. So you kind of get the picture here that stress seems to be a part of this. And in fact, yeah, stress can have an effect on symptoms of IBS, but also food intolerances, sensitivities, so that can cause digestive sort of issues if you have those foods that you're sort of intolerant to, and small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which essentially just the bacteria that are in your small intestine, they're growing too much. Too many of the wrong kind of bacteria, or even too much of the right kind of bacteria, can cause issues. And yeah, so that's kind of what happens if you've got IBS. Do you know what causes IBS?
We don't know.
You got me, Luke.
Yes.
You're right. We're not sure what causes IBS. Lots of people have suggested lots of different things, but not a single one of them has been proven to be true. It's obviously a difficult thing to prove because, we've not really spoken about the diagnosis of it yet, but let's talk about that really briefly now. There's not a test for IBS. There's some tests that they can do to rule out other things, but what IBS essentially is you have these issues with no sort of discernible cause, that it's not these other things. So we call this IBS, right? If you've got, if you don't have celiac disease or inflammatory bowel disease, but you've got these sort of symptoms and you've not got a few other things, they'll sort of say, well, this is IBS. Even though if you look at IBS, there's different types of IBS, and there's some overlap between those types, and also some things that are just quite different, and there's different causes for IBS. It's really weird. It's kind of become a sort of catch-all for it's not this stuff.
So it very much is an umbrella term. And does that mean that if you have a diagnosis of IBS, somebody else with a diagnosis of IBS might actually, the causes of their IBS might be entirely different to the causes of your IBS?
Yeah, absolutely. But also what that means is because there's no specific test for IBS, and you've basically got to rule out other things, it could just mean that you have two completely different things there, two completely different things going on. Someone could have been misdiagnosed and actually have some other issue, some other issue going on. And even then, the big group of people that we say have IBS could have a multitude of different things, right? It's really, you say it's a sort of an umbrella term, and I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I would hesitate to call it that because it's more of just a catch-all to me, right? Those, I don't know why, those two things have a sort of different, they sit differently in my brain. Whereas an umbrella term is like, yeah, we're including all of this stuff here, to bring all these things together. Whereas a catch-all is just, man, I don't know what it is, but I know it's not this stuff, so there you go.
So an umbrella term might be, say, in your sort of definition here, an umbrella term might be neurodivergence. Yeah. In that it's like it covers a bunch of specific things. And then the catch-all is the thing that sits underneath all the neurodivergence and goes, right, if it's not any of those things, we'll catch the last bunch of them and go, right, it's this thing.
Yeah, it's about sort of specificity. To me, this is more of a sort of non-specific thing. As in, you can't positively say someone has IBS, really. You can just say you have IBS because you don't have these other things.
But they do have these problems.
Yeah, you've got these problems without these causes, therefore we're going to call this that, which is kind of odd to me. But yeah, no. So let's get back to the causes that have been suggested. One of the ones that came up, the one that I'm going to be talking about now because I thought it was quite interesting, but obviously there are different things that can cause IBS. We've talked about stressful life events and whatnot, so there could be some sort of psychosomatic thing going on there. But immune reactions have been brought up. So apparently about 10% of previously healthy people recover from their infections but are left with IBS, infections of, the bowels. And the hypothesis is that a gut infection sort of messes up how your intestines, your bowel sort of deal with antigens. And so it's not necessarily like an allergic reaction, but there is a sort of localized sort of inflammation, right? A localized immune reaction that responds to certain things in foods where it shouldn't. And that would then cause the sort of symptoms that we would sort of expect from IBS. And they tested this in mice. So they basically injected mice with harmful gut bacteria and then gave them egg whites with the antigens, the specific sort of proteins that your body will recognize from egg whites. And then once the gut infection had gone, they gave them the egg whites again, and then they had some abdominal pain, apparently. They measured that by seeing how much their stomach muscle contracted. They didn't ask little mice how they felt. And the mice that didn't have the egg whites, the albumin, whilst they were infected, had no trouble. Apparently, which I find quite interesting. And then they also went on to talk about, this was from an article, they also went on to talk about how that immune reaction might not be there in different types of IBS, because infection-induced IBS is only one of a few different categories. As I've said already, there's IBS linked to sort of stress, so it's more sort of mental stuff. So kind of figuring that out as well is kind of what people are starting to do. It's kind of what people are doing. We're trying to figure out essentially what causes IBS, and we don't know. And again, I think it's going to be really difficult. It's really difficult to find out a cause of something when that thing isn't a thing.
It's like cancer. It's like lots of things. Yeah.
Well, I mean, cancer is different because cancer is one thing.
Okay.
Ultimately,
we know the problem. Yes.
Well, no, I get where you're coming from, but I mean, not for your sake, but for anyone listening, cancer is the unregulated growth of cells, right? Basically, what happens is in your cells, they've got little things in them that say you need to die now. Time's up, die, right? Or stop replicating and die, right? That happens inside your cells. What can happen with cancer is that a number of different events will mess up the genes or regulator sort of things inside your cells, and it can cause those cells to start dividing just rapidly, right? That's what a tumor is. A tumor is just something that is it's uncontrolled cell growth, and so yeah, it all, like all cancers are fundamentally uncontrolled cell growth, right? And so that's why all cancers, I would say cancer is kind of one thing, despite the fact that it can have many, many different sort of effects and outcomes, right? Because obviously, like uncontrolled cell growth in your heart, getting a tumor in your heart, that's going to be very different than, getting skin cancer. But then also cancers can spread to other parts of the body and then grow there. It's complex and it's complicated, but fundamentally they all come down to like the same trigger, which is uncontrolled cell growth or unregulated cell growth, right? But when it comes to IBS, it's not necessarily one root cause. Do you know what I mean? It could be a number of different. I mean, stress resulting in these symptoms, it could have an entirely different pathway to an infection that results in those symptoms. It's just the symptoms look the same. It's actually kind of the opposite of cancer, where one thing creates many outcomes. In this case, it could be many things create a similar outcome, right? But anyway, we're currently trying to figure out what the heck is going on with IBS, what's causing it, and all of that. And I did read an article, a sort of review that was talking about how essentially we might have an issue when it comes to IBS as a term. The article spoke about, saying the bowel was irritable. It's not the best way to sort of discuss it. It gives a sort of false view of what's going on, but also that IBS has become such a catch-all term that we're including lots of different things that maybe are muddying the waters on, each specific problem itself. But when it comes to treatment, as we said, there's no cure. There's no one thing that works for everyone. The NHS specifically says there's no single diet or medicine that works for everyone with IBS, but there are lots of things that can help if you've been diagnosed with it. So essentially, it's very individual thing. Like we don't have one sort of catch-all, cure or treatment, right? You can't just say, do this and it will be fine. It really, really depends. And currently, we're not even treating IBS. We're just treating the symptoms. Oh, you've got stomach pain? Oh, here, take these painkillers. Oh, here, take these relaxants. Oh, you've got constipation? Take a laxative. Oh, you've got really, really loose stool? Oh, take this stool hardener. I can't remember the thing. But you know what I mean? Like, we're treating the symptoms, we're not treating the thing itself. But, you know, as I said, the NHS recommends making homemade meals with fresh ingredients when you can, keeping in a diary of what you eat and any symptoms you've got. So like a food diary to see what foods are causing what symptoms. Try and relax, get plenty of exercise, try probiotics for a month to see if they help. Don't delay or skip meals, don't eat too quickly, don't eat lots of fatty, spicy or processed foods, and don't eat more than 3 portions of fresh fruit a day. A portion is 80 grams, Luke, there you go. Do not drink more than 3 cups of tea or coffee every day. You can tell that's from the UK. They can't say don't drink more than they really, it's probably don't drink more than 1. But they know they can't say don't drink more than 1. Don't drink more than 3. That's 1 with each, you know, morning, evening,
3 from
lunch.
1 from Starbucks is 3 normal cups of coffee.
Yeah. Well, I'm talking about tea, man. Like, people in the UK, you try and get someone in the UK who drinks tea to have less than 3 cups of tea a day. They have 1 when they get up. They have 1 before bed. Nice tea at lunchtime. Oof.
I don't have a problem.
You have a problem?
I have a problem. It's tea. It's charming. It's British.
Oh, it's
those coffee people, they've got a problem. They're crazy.
They're insane.
But me, with my tea, I'm just being charming and British. A cup of tea.
Where did you get that tea from, Luke? Where did Britain get its tea from? Why is tea British? Huh?
Oh, no. Move on.
And have you heard of FODMAP before?
FODMAP? No.
Fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols, which are short-chain carbohydrates, sugars, basically, that the small intestine absorbs poorly. So basically, FODMAP, you might have heard of someone going on a low FODMAP diet, basically taking out the sort of things that your small intestine doesn't deal with quite as well from your diet. But don't do this without speaking to a doctor or a medical professional, please, because it can be helpful for people with IBS, but it's a very restrictive diet. It's very, very restrictive. I mean, it specifically says on the NHS website that, you know, you can actually lose a lot of weight doing this dangerously. So you need to speak to a medical professional, otherwise you might get into some trouble. But yeah, the low FODMAP diet is a 3-step thing. You avoid eating FODMAP foods, then you start to reintroduce them to see which ones are causing issues, and then if they cause symptoms, you can avoid or limit, you know, your intake of those specific ones, right? And yeah, I mean, as well, you can avoid dairy. These are all sort of FODMAP foods, right? So dairy, so milk, yogurt, ice cream, wheat, so cereals, bread, all that sort of stuff, beans and lentils, certain vegetables like onions, garlic, artichokes, asparagus, and some fruits like apples and cherries and pears and peaches. So instead, you want to have low FODMAP foods like eggs and meat, cheeses, almond milk, or, you know, sort of non-dairy milks, grains like rice and oats and quinoa, and eggplants, potatoes, tomatoes and whatnot are quite good as well, grapes and oranges, stuff that are sort of easy to digest. I mean, it's almost kind of intuitive when you think about it, right? Like, what is kind of more easy for you to digest and what is less easy. If it's more sort of got that tough sort of cellulose, sort of like really high fibrous stuff, that is probably harder to digest, you know, like your wheats, beans and lentils, those are quite tough as well, right? All those sorts of things, harder for you to digest. You want to basically eat the easier to digest stuff. And it can reduce symptoms in up to 86% of people. But again, it's not 100%. It's a really difficult thing, IBS, because I can't sit here and say, yep, this will work, or this is universally the case, because nothing really seems to be universally the case with IBS. And as I've already mentioned, you could do probiotics. Those are just live microorganisms that you sort of drink in it, like I say, a Yakult or whatever. Is that a probiotic? I think it is. I've not had Yakult for a long time, so I really don't care. But yeah, no, basically just bacteria that are similar to ones you usually have in your gut. But these ones are obviously sort of, you're putting them in there, they're getting there, and you're hopefully going to try and change the composition of your gut to be a bacterial sort of environment. So more good bacteria and less sort of unhelpful bacteria, which could sort of have an effect on your digestion, because those bacteria do, you know, have quite a role in digestion. But there's also mental therapies, so CBT, which changes how you think and feel to change your IBS symptoms, because again, stress can have an effect on IBS. There's also hypnotherapy, apparently, where, and again, this is from the NHS, they're saying a trance-like state in which you're relaxed or focused to help improve your IBS symptoms, like gut-directed hypnotherapy. Wow. Mad. And then relaxation training, which is like relaxing muscles or reducing stress, because there's an idea that, you know, there's more contractions caused by more stress, and that can have the effect. But yeah, no, I mean, ultimately, the problem with IBS is that, you know, the diagnosis of it is just, you don't have this other stuff. And if you don't have any disease that we can sort of, like, you know, I mean, I've got a paper that I'll just read a quote from it here. It says, for the past 40 years, the diagnosis of IBS has been based on the positive diagnosis of compatible symptoms and exclusion of organic disease, specifically colon cancer and Crohn's disease. So if you have these symptoms but don't have those two things, then we say you've got IBS. But, you know, I mean, IBS doesn't seem to be a thing in and of itself, to my knowledge.
Sounds like a very unhelpful diagnosis, other than to validify that you're like not going insane, and that you have a genuine problem, a medical problem, and that comes with it benefits, like in your workplace, for example, it might be helpful. But for actually telling you what to do, it's not, it doesn't really do anything. Yeah, it's just a label.
Yeah, exactly. It is just a label. Yeah. It's a helpful label. I assume. You know, it's probably a useful label to some people. Again, we're very privileged, but we don't have IBS because our IBS person is out. But the point is that, you know, having a label, as we've spoken about on the podcast before, can be really, really helpful. You know, I mean, it can reduce stress in and of itself.
Of
just
course.
Having a name for something that's going on with you. So I'm not going to devalue having a label at all, but there is a point where just a label is, you know, maybe we need a bit more. You know, maybe we need to look into this a little bit more and really sort of figure out what it is that is sort of going on.
Yeah, so I don't at all mean to devalue the social and psychological importance of a label. I just mean that, like, the fact that this is, like, well, as you said at the start, 20% of the world, but like a decent chunk of the world, like a tenth of the world maybe, having this condition, and you can go through all the pain of having the symptoms for long enough to then seek a diagnosis, and they give you a diagnosis, and the diagnosis doesn't tell you much of what you can actually do about it. It's not a great situation to be in, and it obviously shows how much more research we need to do in this area.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The diagnosis is, hey, you don't have these two other things. You have this other stuff.
But you aren't crazy.
Basically, yeah.
Like, that's, wow, like, so unhelpful in that specific medical sense.
Yeah, but there's just one thing left to do, Luke. It's a quickfire quiz.
It's a quickfire quiz. Dun 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 dun. IBS edition.
So the rules for the quickfire quiz are the same as always. I'll ask one question. That's one question between you and the audience, Luke. The first person to answer the question wins. If you answer before Luke, you win. What do they win, Luke?
A £100 million grant to do research into IBS, paid for personally by Corrie. It's what the world needs, Corrie.
So, God. What was the original name for IBS?
Oh, God. Oh, you're going to get it before me, aren't you, audience member? Irritable colon syndrome.
Ding, ding, ding. That is correct. Well done,
yes.
Luke. You probably lost, but that's not too bad.
I won £100 million. Or they did. Basically, anyone with IBS won. And Corrie's paying the bill.
I am not paying anything, but I will pay the piper and say that it's time to thank our patrons.
Yes, Corrie, let's thank new patrons.
Well, I would like to say thank you to Maya Bailey Brainguard.
Well, that's all well and good, but I want to say thank you to Katowski.
Well, go ahead, Luke, because I'll say thank you to Faye Rosewood.
No, I'm over it now. I want to say thank you to Dr. Pezza.
Well, I'll Lydia do that whilst I say thank you to Lydia. Lydia do that.
Yeah, thank you. I want to say thank you to Snovim Godom.
And I'll say thanks to Emma Louise.
Thank you, Christina Donnestorg.
Thank you, Eberin, or Eberin. I don't know. Thank you.
What's your favourite winged animal? Because I want to thank Bats Rule.
Well, while you do that, I will thank Harjit Singh.
What's your favourite writing service and measure of distance?
Parchment Meters.
No. Thank you, Paige Miles.
Thank you, Zeph.
Thank you to the person that Corrie forgot to read, Archeo Geek.
Thank you, Archeo Geek.
Thank you, Zeph.
Thank you, Soxiad.
Thank you, Pitchpodge. I feel like we've thanked Pitchpodge before. Has Pitchpodge left and come back so that we thank them again?
Maybe Corey didn't delete all of the people that he should have deleted from the list. And thank you, Johanna, or Johanna. I think for the second time, but thank you nonetheless.
Ooh, that was a lot of thanking.
That was some good patron thanking. But before we go, we would like to thank all of our patrons with an extra special thank you to exec producers Danito and Glitchrabbit. And thank you for watching. You can find the full references for this episode down in the description. Subscribe for new episodes every Sunday. Remember to leave us a nice wee comment. You can support the pod at patreon.com/SciGuys, or you can find and contact us at SciGuysPod on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and at SciGuys on TikTok too. Or you can send us an email at sciguyspod@gmail.com.
That's sciguyspod@gmail.com. Sciguyspod
at gmail.com. You can follow me at NotCorey everywhere.
You can follow me at Luke Cupforth everywhere.
Bye.
Bye.
BS.
Very good.